glory to him who loved us and freed us by shedding his blood for us. And all glory to him whom the grave could not hold, but who rose again on the third day, conquering death, redeeming sin, and giving life to those who were once dead, but now can be alive forever and ever and ever. Let's sing See What a Morning. See what a morning, gloriously bright, with the dawning of hope in Jerusalem. Folded the grave closed, tomb filled with light, as the angels announced Christ is risen. See God's salvation plan, God in love, born to pay, paid in sacrifice, fulfilled in Christ the Lamb, for he lives, Christ is risen from the dead. See Mary weeping, where is he laid? As in sorrow she turns from the empty tomb. Hears a voice speaking, calling her name. It's the Master, the Lord, gives her life again. The voice that spans the years, speaking life, stirring hope, bringing peace to us. Will sound till he appears, for he lives, Christ risen from the dead. One with the Father, Ancient of Days, through the Spirit of glows, faith with certainty. Honor and blessing, glory and praise to the King, crowned with power and authority. And we are raised with him. Death is dead, love is won, Christ is conquered. And we shall reign with him, for he lives, Christ is risen from the dead. And we are reign with him. Death is dead, love is won, Christ is conquered. And we shall reign with him, for he lives, Christ is risen from the dead.
Hi there, John. Right, good afternoon to you and welcome to our Wednesday relaunch. Some of you, it's the first time you've been here and we're delighted to welcome you in particular today. It's always our pleasure to be able to extend hospitality to you, give you a good lunch, and today you have the honour of being able to share in the first soup of the year, which means that officially autumn has started now. So you get soup every Wednesday and we hope that you'll enjoy that as well. Delighted to welcome you. Always, those of you joining online as well, we're glad to welcome you. I know that you not always get out, and we're glad to give this opportunity for you to join us in our Wednesday at ReLaunch, which is really just an opportunity for us all, no matter who we are, where we're from, to start again, to launch out into the week. No matter what the first couple of days have been like, if they've been a total disaster, well, it's a fresh start. We can start all over again. And all of us need that, and that in many ways is what the message of the Bible is really all about. It's underlining that no matter who we are, no matter what we've done, no matter what baggage we bring, it is possible for us to find in the Lord Jesus Christ one who just rebuilds our lives and who launches us out again. I thought we'd start with a little bit of history and memorabilia, a picture of a pop group from the 1960s. They were called The Animals. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Eric Burden and The Animals. In the days when people called pop groups kind of intelligible names. Nowadays they call them all sorts of crazy things, but back then it was pretty much descriptive. So you had the Dave Clark Five, which was basically what it said it was. It was Dave Clark and five others, or three or four others that make the five. You had Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch, and they just told you who they were. And the Animals really rose to fame in 1964 with a hit song called The House of the Rising Sun. Hands up, you know The House of the Rising Sun? Yeah, you are giving your age away, but not to worry. It was a big hit for them. And then the following year, they had another hit. It didn't quite reach the heights of The House of the Rising Sun. But the following year, they had another song that was called Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood. And the chorus that ran through it, I'm just a soul whose intentions are good. Oh, Lord, please don't let me be misunderstood. And I always thought, it was a love song. You maybe wouldn't believe that, but it was basically a love song. And I always thought that it might be a little bit of advice if I was writing a book about, for guys, how to court a young girl. Probably it doesn't help to start calling yourself an animal, because that's probably going to be off-putting. But hey, if you are the Animals, that was the kind of line they took. And they were quite liable to be misunderstood. And that really is our theme today. It's kind of coping with misunderstanding. We've been following through over the course of these past Wednesday lunchtimes. A lady called Hannah in the first book of Samuel in the Bible. Her story is one in which we find that she has to cope with a lot of things. And we're thinking today about coping with misunderstanding. And going to read a little bit more of her story. The kind of backstory to this is Hannah was married to a guy called Elkanah. You don't need to worry too much about that, other than the fact that Elkanah had, as well as Hannah, he had another wife, Peninnah, and Peninnah made Hannah's life miserable. Peninnah was able to have children, Hannah wasn't able to have children, and therefore she had that disappointment, that natural disappointment, and she also had the rivalry from the other wife. She had a lot of irritation and annoyance being flung at her as the other lady just rubbed it in the whole time and made her life an absolute misery. And every year, the whole family, if you can call them that, a pretty dysfunctional family, they all went up to the kind of temple, as it was, at a place called Shiloh in the land of Israel, and they do that on a kind of annual basis. And the story of Hannah really begins with her being in the temple, and today we're going to read just a little bit that speaks about misunderstanding. You probably have a lot of misunderstanding. I've been misunderstood a lot. I remember a classic book by a guy called James Dobson, who was a kind of expert on parenting. And he wrote a book about parenting, and he was trying to explain the difference between men and women, if you need to have that explained to you. And he was telling the story of an occasion where he and his wife, in the middle of the night, bang in the middle of the night, it's sort of 2 o'clock in the morning, it's pitch dark, and they hear this noise in the house. And it's clearly someone has broken into the house. It's a burglar has come into the house, and they are both wide awake and immediately alert to the fact that there is a burglar in the house, and they both run for the door. And both of them have a real problem, because he, being the man, he's trying to pull the door open, and clearly the burglar on the other side of the door is a pretty strong guy, and is holding the door, the bedroom door shut. So Jobson is trying to pull the door open like that, and it's not giving at all. And that's his problem. He's just breaking into sweat doing that. And all the while he's doing that, his wife, who wants to keep the burglar out. She is putting her whole weight against the door and pushing it shut and thinking, this burglar is very insistent, trying to get into the bedroom like that. And of course, the burglar isn't there at all. The burglar is downstairs just pilfering the whole house. And they are contesting with one another, but it's pitch dark. They don't realize that both of them are approaching the problem in an entirely different way. They have kind of misunderstood the intentions of the other. And quite often that's what happens in our lives, that we are misunderstood, that someone just views a situation from an entirely different perspective, and as a result, we end up being misunderstood and can cause all sorts of problems. This lady Hannah is misunderstood. So here we are. On the screen there you have the words, as she kept on praying to the Lord in the temple there, she's troubled, she's miserable, she's just pouring out her heart to the Lord and saying how much anguish she's in because of all the hassle that she's getting in her life. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli, who's the priest, observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice wasn't heard. You probably prayed like that yourself, where you're not saying anything audibly, but you're praying. You're saying, "Oh no, God." And she's doing that. And Eli, the priest, is watching her. And Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, "How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine." So we're going to pause there and just learn the first lesson in regard to being misunderstood. And it's a very simple, easily remembered lesson. And it's simply this: don't be surprised. It happens. It shouldn't happen, and it certainly shouldn't have happened in the temple there, because, hey, this is the priest. Surely the priest in the temple is going to figure out that's why people come to the temple. That's what the lady presumably is doing. But he assumes that she's drunk. And why he assumed that is probably bound up with his sons, because his sons, who kind of helped him out in the temple, they were a really nasty couple of boys, and they misbehaved. They conducted themselves in all sorts of unseemly ways in the temple, so unseemly that I'm not able to repeat them here, because this is a kind of family show, and it's not really fit for children to be privy to. But there were all sorts of stuff going on the part of his sons. Eli knew about that, and he maybe just assumed that's just what people are like, and therefore he sees this lady coming in, and she's not audibly speaking, she's moving her lips like that, and he assumes she is drunk, which she's not. She's the total opposite, but she's misunderstood. So that's the first line. Don't be surprised. It happens. I could tell you all sorts of stories of times when I've been misunderstood. There was a service that I once conducted a long time ago in Cumbernauld, and after the evening service, this lady came storming round to the vestry and breezed in, and she bellowed out, "How dare you do that?" And I hadn't a clue what she was on about. And she said, "You know perfectly well what I'm on about." And I said, "I haven't a clue. You're going to have to wind it back a frame or two. Tell me, what is your problem?" And she said, "You have no right at all to do what you did." And I said, "Well, you're going to have to tell me what I've done before I can start figuring out whether I have a right to do it or not." And she said, "You had no right to tell the congregation my life story." And I said, "Well, I don't know your life story." And she said, "Really?" She said, "Because you just rehearsed my whole life story." And I said, "Well, I don't know your life story, but clearly the Lord knows your life story, and maybe he's reminding you he knows everything about you." And she misunderstood. She assumed that I had been doing some research on her life and was parading before the congregation her story. She misunderstood the situation. It happens. That's the first thing. So don't be surprised. Secondly, moving on in the story here, what happens next? Verse 15, "Not so, my lord," Hannah replied. "I'm a woman who is deeply troubled. I've not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." So lesson number 2 in terms of being misunderstood. Lesson number 1 is it happens, so don't be surprised. Lesson number 2 is don't be provoked. That's our natural reaction. It kind of gets our back up a little bit when people do misunderstand us like that, and we want to kind of retaliate. And when someone says, "Hey, you are a drunkard," and we think, "I'm not a drunkard. we want to hit back and speak something pretty nasty to them. But what Hannah does here is a helpful guide. She doesn't lose the rag. She's not provoked. She doesn't storm off. She just explains what's actually been going on. She explains it negatively, first of all. I've not been drinking wine or beer. Then positively, what I have been doing is I've just been praying. Kind of stands to reason. I'm in the temple. You're a priest. You should kind of know all about that. That's what I've been doing. And she then leaves it like that in the hope that he will kind of understand. So you don't get provoked. You just try and explain things to the person. I once, again in Common Old, I had an irate lady. You must think Common Old is just full of irate ladies, but it's not really. But there was certainly another irate lady who rang me up one day because her father had been seriously ill. Her father was a member of the church, and she was really furious that I had not been to visit him. And so she was ringing up, and she for about 3 minutes, she just gave me a tirade over the telephone call, telling me what a rotten minister I was, what a rotten church it was, what a rotten God it was, and how rotten my conduct had been in that I hadn't visited her dad. And she wouldn't listen to anything that I was saying at all, and put the phone down. And I thought, whoa, not pleasant. And so I went round to see her, banged on the door, and I could see the moment she opened the door, and I introduced myself, said who I was. She immediately wanted to slam the door. I put my foot in the door and said, I know you want to slam the door, I know you don't want to speak to me, but I said, and I don't you want to listen to what I've got to say, but I've actually written a letter that explains it, and I'd like you to have the letter. And I'd taken that trouble beforehand just to explain in the letter what actually had happened. I knew the guy was ill. I'd been round to visit him, but he had moved flats. And no one had passed on where he was. The neighbors didn't know where he was. None of the people that I'd contacted knew where he was. So I'm lost because I don't know where he is to be able to visit him. And I explained that, I am not a prophet in that I can kind of see where people are now living when they haven't told me where they've moved to. And I put all of that, explained it in the letter to her, handed the letter to her, and later that afternoon she rang me up, and she was very conciliatory, very apologetic, and said, I got the wrong end of the stick. I just explained it to her. So that's the second lesson. Don't be provoked. Just try and explain it best you can. Third lesson, as we finish off the story here from verse 17. Eli answered her, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." And she said, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." And then she went away and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. And third lesson is this. Don't be surprised, the first lesson. Don't be provoked is the second. And thirdly, when you are misunderstood, don't be downcast. Don't let it get to you, because there is a God, the God of Israel that Eli speaks about, and the Lord to whom Hannah refers. There is a God who knows what the situation is. And there's a God who not only knows what your situation is, and knows all the ins and outs, knows all that has been going on, but he cares about you. And he cares enough to be able to address and to resolve all the issues that may be going on in that situation. And we learn to rest in that knowledge that there is that God who has come to us in the person of Jesus. As I was reminding you last week, he sees our misery, he hears our cries, he feels our pain, and he comes to rescue us. And Hannah is just kind of holding on to that's who he is. And that's the biggest, greatest reality about the world in which we live. It's his world, and he's there, and he does care for us, and he sees all that is going on. And therefore, even when I'm misunderstood, I'd prefer not to be, but even when I am, I'll try and explain as best I can what the situation is. If need be, I'll apologize if the situation is one where I've stepped out of line, but I'll leave it in his hands in the confidence he's able to sort things out. And may God enable us in all life's circumstances to know his presence and to know his help, and to find how good he is at sorting things out. Let me pray. Lord, thank you for the very honest narrative that you give that kind of helps us just recognize ourselves and the scenarios that come up in our lives. None of us like being misunderstood, and yet often that's what happens. And how glad we are that you do see the reality of the situation. You know what's going on. Thank you that you do care. Thank you that you have come, you do come. And you're always so good at being able to sort these things out. And whatever may be the problems that we each come with today, we simply, in the quietness of this moment, lay it before you, Lord, and say, Lord, please, would you sort that out? Would you resolve that? Would you help us in that? We leave it with you. You're good, you're kind, you're strong, and you're wonderfully able to fix things. So would you fix the problems for us? We ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.